As a constitutional law attorney, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and the Supreme Court of the United States heard a very, very important case today that you really need to pay attention to. It's called Moore versus the United States. Oral arguments happened this morning, and this is an incredibly important case, not just for originalism and federalism to ensure that we have a limited government, but also for one of the things that Americans absolutely hate the most, which is taxes, specifically income tax versus unrealized gains. So we're going to talk about this case, what its importance is, and how this goes to the entire scope of why America needs to return to a federalist state sovereignty model instead of a uniparty that is centered in Washington, D.C., that is out of control and is spending, and the onus needs to be on Congress to actually practice the principles of limited government, limited balanced budget spending, and not just compelling Americans to fund all of these things that none of us really care about with our tax dollars. So we're going to talk about all of this and more next with my good friend Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute right after this. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. All right, so the Supreme Court is set to consider this month what the Hill is describing as a quadrillion dollar question in a major tax case. So the Hill goes on to say the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in early December on a case that has the potential to broadly reshape the U.S. tax code and cost the government hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. At issue is Moore versus United States, and the question of whether the federal government can tax certain types of quote unquote unrealized gains, which are property like stocks or bonds that people own, but from which they haven't directly recouped the value, so they don't have direct access to the money that the property is worth. Large portions of the U.S. tax code require that income be realized before it can be taxed, but critics say it's an inherently wishy-washy concept that courts have been ignoring for years due to administrative practicalities. So even if the court limits the scope of its decision to the specific tax referenced in the case, known as the mandatory reparation tax, a ruling in favor of the plaintiffs could cost $340 billion over the next decade, according to the Justice Department. So for comparison, that would cancel out all the extra tax revenue generated by the $80 billion of IRS funding boost, and then add $140 billion to the national deficit, which now stands between 26 and 33 trillion, according to various measurements. And so this decision has a lot of wide-ranging implications. And of course, the Biden administration will not like this particular decision. And we do have an interesting split on the court. I like to call it kind of a 3-3-3. It's not really a conservative majority. We have three distinct conservatives, three more moderates, and then three very clearly liberals. So where do we break this all down? Joining me now is our good friend Tho Bishop, who is with the Mises Institute. And Tho, what is the importance of Moore versus the United States, and where are we potentially headed with this Supreme Court decision that will likely be out early in the year?
Well, this is an important case for both the short term and the long term, in large part because of Washington's inability to take seriously matters of debt and spending. So the reason why this case is coming up now is that this actually involves something that came up as a result of the Republican Trump tax plan from 2018, dealing with a foreign-owned business by an American couple. They're being asked to pay $15,000 for their ownership within a company that they have not taken any money out of. Now, there's some arguments about some of the specific details there, but that's ultimately kind of the argument going into this specific case. Now, this is particularly important because, if you go on social media, you'll often see sort of left-wing memes where they'll point out, right, the net worth of, say, Elon Musk, and say, oh, well, if we just taxed, X amount from Elon Musk, then we could solve, insert whatever your cause of the day is there, and we could solve all these problems. But of course, when we look at the net wealth of someone like an Elon Musk, it's not like they have all that money in a bank account, or a vault swimming around like Scrooge McDuck. Most of their wealth is held in, stocks and bonds and assets and things like that. And if they don't sell those assets, if Elon Musk isn't selling his Tesla stock, then those are unrealized profits there. And it's not until that actually becomes dollars in his account that you'd have that usual taxable event there. But of course, you have people like Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Bernie Sanders, the progressive wing that wants to evaluate aggressive tax the rich style proposals for this unrealized wealth going forward. You have a variety of ways the tax cut currently is set based off of the assumptions that the IRS can get this money if they so choose to. And so this small case over really a $15,000 tax bill, it highlights the extent to which the justice system, the legal system, has been unwilling to really question some of the tax weaponry, essentially, that the federal government has created for itself. And it really goes to the possibility of creating very real checks for some of the most aggressive, most strongly held desires of the progressive left going forward on some of the changes that they would like to make to the tax code if they have further political control in the future.
Yeah, so let's talk about this whole idea of even taxing unrealized gains, because the 16th Amendment, which I believe should be repealed and was one of the worst weaponizations of the federal government that has led to overspending and really weaponizing the IRS against Americans. But the 16th Amendment textually says that Congress has the power to lay and collect income tax. And so this is a portion of the tax code that, as the Hill describes it, is kind of wishy-washy. Is this really even constitutional? And should the court address that particular question, contrasting what's currently going on with the text of the 16th Amendment?
Well, I think narrowly read, it is not constitutional. The problem is, of course, is that the question of what is constitutional has become so politicized over time. It really is a question of to what extent can the Supreme Court or the judicial system rationalize a desire that the government has far more often than not. And that's kind of one of the issues that we have here, is that the actual text of the amendment, the actual kind of a strict constitutional interpretation of this goes out the window when you're dealing with this 3-3-3 court, because we've seen in the past, if we think of Chief Justice Roberts as kind of the head of that middle group, where someone like Roberts, he doesn't simply think in a narrow framework as a judge. there is a political dynamic that factors into his court cases, Obamacare being the most obvious example of that, where there is a factor kind of brought in there about the larger ramifications that this is going to have on, how much is this going to require the IRS to change, a massive reworking of the tax code in order to try to match the tax receipts that you would not get if this goes out. What are the liabilities that the federal government would have from having to pay back other entities that have paid this tax that would now be ruled unconstitutional? So the financial costs that be considered within that. And so taking into account all of these aspects that really have nothing to do with the narrow interpretation of this clause, of this amendment, these additional factors going in there that can shape this opinion. That's ultimately, unfortunately, the breakdown of the constitutional order. But that is how these questions of constitutionality are really interpreted in modern America. And this is I think a great example of some of these broader problems that we have with the American Republic. But these are going to be additional factors that should not play a role in this, but are inevitably going to, because of, as you mentioned, kind of where we are right now with the breakdown of how the Supreme Court acts in practice.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And you're right to characterize this as one of the breakdowns in the system of the American Republic, because it is the Supreme Court's duty and constitutional role to not address the political and policy questions, but just address the strict interpretation of application of the U.S. Constitution to government agencies and government actors and say, are they falling within the strict bounds of the limits on government power? And if we contrast what's going on in the tax code with the strict text of the language of the 16th Amendment, then it really should be the Supreme Court as simple as saying, you can't do this. And the outcome of this is really Congress's problem to address. And whether or not they address any sort of payback or anything in terms of moving forward, if they say, okay, this is unconstitutional as of now, but we're not going to address anything that's in the past unless Congress wants to and can deal with that. But to put this back on Congress to say, not only do you need a balanced budget, obviously, but you need to really deal with the tax code and maybe, wild idea, rein in your spending so that you don't have to try to go after these unrealized gains and this other portion of American wealth that truly is not in solve the problem of what I would call a tax crisis in America. And one of the things that people are so upset about, I mean, the IRS is so hated and abhorred, and yet we see the Biden administration that wants to give more funding and fund 96,000 new IRS agents, where no conservative wants that. And so I think under Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, we may see some congressional spending reined in and actually using the power of the purse in a way that's helpful. But for the Supreme Court, I would love to see Justice Gorsuch in particular go after this issue, because he has railed against the administrative state and he has railed against this unelected bureaucracy that we would call the deep state or the swamp that does all of these kinds of unconstitutional things without any true accountability. And so I hope that we get to at least a majority of the Supreme Court, even if it is a narrowly tailored opinion that specifically just deals with this. But what happens ultimately if we get to a more broad opinion that I could see someone like Justice Gorsuch and the other two conservatives, Alito and Thomas, really railing against the administrative state and kind of expanding this decision to put the onus and the obligation on Congress where it belongs to actually reform the tax code?
So I think this will throw Washington into a real crisis, because Washington right now, they've been able to be enabled by a variety of these government entities. On one side, the Federal Reserve, which had low interest rates, which encouraged spending. Now they're getting pressure on that side with rising interest rates. The interest payments on the debt have gone up. So that's already pushed our deficits into trillions of dollars without any means of stopping that in the short term. If you have a hit on the revenue side, which is what this case would do, then Washington's going to be there's two ways out of that. You either cut your spending, which there's been no political will to do so, or you increase revenue. And so if they can't get it this way, they're going to have to increase taxes on the middle class. There's a political penalty that comes into that. We have seen in the past of them trying to supplement revenue with with fees and other things. I remember, like, for example, the increases in cigarette taxes that Obama had as part of his economic policies back in 2009. That wasn't a middle class tax per se, but it was another revenue source that they built in to try to make up for some of the spending there. And so if you have this means of revenue generation taken away from Washington, eventually, when you can't just simply print and borrow the way you used to, you're going to have to either cut or you're going to have to tax more. And so this is going to create a major problem in Washington that is already very dysfunctional. And particularly going into campaign season, it'd be very interesting to see just how much support is there for what will inevitably be some sort of new form of tax that's going to hit the middle class that is being hurt by inflation, adding on to the pain as a response to this.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really fascinating to see when this Supreme Court decision is handed down, if it does favor the narrow reading of the 16th Amendment and to say that this kind of unrealized gains can't be taxed. And if it goes that far, to see if this opinion drops in February versus, say, June, that's going to have a real impact on the general election and possibly even the primary season if it is earlier in the Supreme Court's term that this case is dropped. But it's so fascinating to see that this would put Congress really into kind of a tailspin. But if we look at the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, even over the last 40 years with respect to taxes, I mean, Barry Goldwater said it himself in The Conscience of a Conservative, which is one of my favorite books that everybody should read, back in the 1980s. I mean, this is when I was born in 84, to give you kind of some perspective. And he said even then that Republicans are not approaching economics and real property and property value and the right to property from a genuinely conservative manner, that Washington has basically become a uniparty. And he's saying this all the way back in the 80s and saying that because a government is a non-revenue generating institution, that it thinks that it can just tax more and then spend on whatever it wants, rather than actually having to go like any other sort of nonprofit and say, hey, this is what we would like to do, and actually advocate for solutions and see if anyone is willing to fund it. This kind of compelled sort of revenue generation is truly stealing from the people and stealing their property and their earned wealth to then go and spend it on whatever Congress just thinks and the federal government thinks that it should be spent on. This is not at all the framework of what the founders intended. When we understand that some tax is necessary for things that we all enjoy, like roadways or policemen or firemen or those kinds of spending, but to see this kind of outrageous spending from the federal government and that Republicans have not been willing to tackle this issue, I think really shows that the heart of conservatism has been lost within the Republicans within the party, when it comes to things like personal wealth and personal property. I mean, this is why we have the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure. I mean, tax and compelled tax in this way that is completely antithetical to the Constitution, I think is actually a Fourth Amendment issue as well that nobody really has addressed from the Republican side. And so if the Supreme Court, though, does decide to hold in favor of a narrower reading of and a true textual reading of the 16th Amendment in this particular case, what are some solutions that Congress could have with respect to the tax code, besides just cutting spending?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I would like to see is a fundamental questioning of the income tax system we have right now. Basically, the income tax system that you have, it's one of the greatest tools the federal government has, not simply because of the economic consequences, right? Not simply because it makes it easy to, have the IRS's hand in the pockets of every American and therefore able to pull money out of your account very easily. But the real problem with it is the civil liberties aspect of it, where everyone kind of tiptoes around, not sure if they're fully complying to the law or not. This is one of the consequences of an overly complicated, complex system where, again, you look at a situation like this where, you have a litany of opinions over whether or not this is lawful. I mean, what that really highlights is the extent to which the tax system that we have right now is far too complicated, far too oppressive. And so ignoring the size to which of the federal government, ignoring the levels of spending the government has, I think there's a valid conversation to be had about the means by which they tax the public. You have seen, I think, a somewhat renewed interest in Washington. I'm not expecting it happening anytime soon on something like a fair tax system, which would massively reduce the sort of people within the economy that actually have to deal with the taxing authorities. That would kind of put the tax compliance aspect onto business entities that do business. That's kind of where the point of contact would be. This is the way that a state like Florida collects most of its revenue and the like. But the issue is that the fundamental core of the IRS, of this income tax system, which was initially sold when the 16th Amendment came in place, right? It was sold as, oh, this is only going to happen to the wealthy. Everyone doesn't have to worry about it. Very quickly, that expanded to become the behemoth that we know and love today. So you're absolutely right that it's the conservatives willing to accept the proper nature, willing to accept the extent to which the income tax has become part of the American system. Simply becoming just simply more moderate, having issues and debates over, what that proper tax rate should be, rather than questioning the system itself that has allowed really for modern government to get the size that it has right now, and hopefully some sort of jolt to the system, which this ruling has the potential of being, will require Republicans, require the political process entirely to reevaluate some of the fundamentals here, in the same way that we've seen all sorts of assumptions that had kind of become assumed within Washington be challenged over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And so I think this is a conversation America very much needs to have, and we'll see if the Supreme Court is willing to be the catalyst for having those conversations.
Yeah, well, that's the Supreme Court argument was heard earlier this morning. And so we'll have to see how that ultimately is broken down, and what the justices end up holding. And again, whether they rule in early January or February, which they could, or if they wait all the way until the end of term in June, and see how that ultimately plays out. But I would love to see Republicans actually have to deal, and Democrats, entire Congress actually have to deal with this issue and make it look potentially something more like Florida. I mean, the state of Florida doesn't have an income tax. It relies totally on sales tax, and a lot of the tourism that comes into the state, actually, people who don't live in Florida pay a lot of that tax. And yet Florida has reduced the deficit since Governor DeSantis has been in office, and is actually, one of the best states in terms of how the tax code in Florida and how the state has been run. And I would love to see something like that paralleled on the national level as well. I mean, Governor DeSantis has made his entire presidential run on the Florida blueprint. And this economic model that's in Florida, there are a lot of people who have moved here because there's no state income tax, similar to Tennessee as well. I mean, there's only a couple of states that don't have state income tax. And one of the main reasons, not only for all of the other conservative things that Governor DeSantis has done, but one of the main reasons that people move to the state of Florida is so that they don't also have that increased tax burden with the state level. And so how could that model be carried on the federal level to look more like a national sales tax, for example, to only put the burden on retailers? I think that the accountant lobby has been one that has not allowed for the repealing of the 16th Amendment and some of that kind of job security. But if accounting firms had to deal more with retailers than they did just with individuals, then, there might be a solution there.
Absolutely. And that's one of the problems, is that, the consolidation of power within Washington, there's a lot of different incentives in alignment here. So one of the people, there's a lot of powerful forces that do not want a simple tax code. They very much do not want something like a sales tax, because it is precisely the complexity of the tax code that keeps a lot of lobbyists, the majority of lobbyists in Washington, in power, keeping those checks going. It's the ability to create little carve outs for your specific niche. It's the ability to stack the odds in favor of current established business while hurting potential rivals that could come up and compete with market share in the future. This consolidated, complex, convoluted tax code helps drive not just simply the federal government itself, but the entire swamp of Washington and its prominence within the economy. And again, the ability to rig the system to benefit certain actors at the expense of the rest of us. And so what we really need, the answer to most of America's problems right now is the restrictions to the federalist system that America was founded upon. If you were looking at, for example, the Democratic Socialists and Bernie Sanders, they love to look at Sweden and some of the Scandinavian countries for like, oh, look at how great socialized healthcare can go there. And there's more to the story there, but that's fine. They've got some concrete examples of countries that are doing it just the way they want. Well, if we want to look at a country that has, I think, a tax system, a fiscal system that we should be looking at, Switzerland is a great example of what federalism should be like, I think, in America today. And what you have in Switzerland is basically the complete reverse of what we have in the United States. In America, most of our tax money goes to DC. Under that's the state, and the least amount of our taxes go to our local government. Now, the local government gets grants from DC, which has strings attached, but that's largely where our money goes. Most of our money goes to Washington. In Switzerland, the majority of your tax money stays local. And then the next much goes to your canton, your state, and the least amount of the money goes to the federal government. So the federal government of Switzerland is very humble by nature. They don't have the same sort of powers and authorities that Washington has. And I think this is sort of such a situation that conservatives need to be looking at in terms of broader reforms to the system. Because at that point, if we had most of our tax dollars staying local, then these big issues like the role of the government in healthcare, a variety of entitlement programs and like all these programs that play a major role in driving up the federal government, that have all this waste, fraud, and abuse, all these dynamics. If you were having to litigate that at the local and state level, then the spending for those programs would go down while the quality of the services would probably go up. We see this all the sort of times where the states, when they're allowed to have creativity in the way that they provide, the way they use tax dollars, you get a lot more bang from the buck from when Florida provides a program than when Washington provides the program. And so I think this goes to a fundamental problem that has been building in America really since the 20th century, the progressive century in this country, aided by the IRS, aided by the growth of administrative state, aided by the Federal Reserve, aided by all of these progressive political victories in the early 20th century and beyond. If we can really go after that and allow for Americans, again, to keep most of their money local at the state level, focus on that as the revenue generator for most of the social services out there, rather than everything going to DC, that is something fundamental that I think would be a very positive vision, where conservatives, I think, for the longest time have not really had a positive vision for what victory really looks like. It's a tax cut here and there, which ultimately might have some short-term gains, but ultimately is keeping the system in place that is rewarding progressive causes in the long run.
Yeah, really well said, Tho Bishop. We need to have a return to federalism and state sovereignty. And that is what Governor DeSantis's vision for America is. And I really applaud him for that. And purposefully talking about those issues. And when he was in Congress and as a founding member of the Freedom Caucus, talking about the power of the purse and how Congress can truly rein in some of this just exorbitant spending, and how Republicans have not been doing that. And you're wise also to point out that while a lot of conservatives focus on the issues of the 1960s and the rise of the sexual revolution in terms of the social issues that have gotten progressivism so out of control, we have to go back further than that in American history to see that the rise of the administrative state, the bureaucracy, and the out-of-control federal government really started in the early 20th century, and how we have a federal government that really doesn't reflect our founding principles of federalism and state sovereignty. That's how we really reclaim America, because the government is supposed to be close to the people. It's supposed to be accountable to the people, and state and local programs are the ones that should have these tax dollars, but limited, of course, and it shouldn't come with federal grants and federal strings attached. States really need to be sufficient and entities and sovereign in and of themselves. And Washington needs to be a lot weaker. And that's why I also love Governor DeSantis's proposal to not only abolish the Department of Education, Commerce, the IRS, and there's one other agency, and then he also wants to move the Department of Agriculture to Iowa. I think that's a brilliant plan. Like, get out of the Beltway, because everything that is in Washington really genuinely ignores the rest of the United States. And so this isn't a problem just with the tax code. I think this one issue really highlights and underscores the problem of federalism that we don't have in the United States, that we don't have federalism anymore the way that the framers intended it. And we need to really return to that if we truly want to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So again, this case, Moore versus the United States, was heard today on Tuesday, December 5th. So if you want to hear those oral arguments and kind of see where the justices might be leaning, you can go to the Supreme Court's website. And I love that they actually stream the audio now of the Supreme Court arguments so that we kind of get that little indication, not just from reporters who may have a bias. So you can go and listen to that for yourself. But Tho Bishop, really appreciate your commentary as always from the Mises Institute. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. My friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help you get the best night's sleep of your life. He didn't stop at the pillow. Mike also created the Giza Dream bed sheets. I have them. I love them. These sheets look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep, which is crucial for our overall health. Mike found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's latest deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets marketing prices down as low as $29.98, depending on the size. So go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code Jenna, Jenna. There, you'll find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and so much more. I have all of this. I love it. Everything from MyPillow and also mystore.com, you can use promo code Jenna. So go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, and also mystore.com. And remember, use the promo code Jenna.